All right, welcome everyone. I call this meeting to order. I declare that we have quorum. Everyone's here. And Councillor Renwick's going to read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I would happily do this. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robinson-Huron Treaty Number 61 of 1850 and the Williams Treaty of 1923. We could commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take action towards real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations. Miigwech.
Thank you. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? I see none. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the public portion of the meeting to consider applications to amend the Community Planning Permit Bylaw 2022-97 pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act. The procedure of the public meeting will be as follows. A brief explanation of the purpose and effect of the application and any correspondence received to date will be given by staff. The applicant or their representative will be asked to provide any additional comments without repeating the information already outlined by staff. Any members of the public present, in person or electronically, will then be permitted to ask questions or provide comments respecting the application. Council will then have the opportunity to question the applicant, the planner, or anyone giving presentation. Once the public meeting is concluded and the input is received, the proposed amendments will be considered by Council. Any persons making representations are requested to first state their name and mailing address. And please note that presentations are limited to 10 minutes. It's important to note that should Council approve any bylaw amendment applications this afternoon, the applicant, the municipality, and certain specified persons and public bodies, as defined by the Planning Act, may appeal the decision. During the 20-day appeal period, which commences on the date on which notice of Council decision is provided, no building permits may be issued or other work commenced. If you wish to be notified of the passage of a bylaw, any appeals, or possible Ontario Land Tribunal hearings, you must file either with the recording secretary or with the clerk a written request for notification prior to the passage of the proposed bylaw. Respecting community planning permit applications, it is important to note that a council decision on such applications may only be appealed by the applicant themselves. Each notice of complete application and public meeting included an explanation of the purpose and effect of the proposed amendment, and notice was required to be posted at the subject lands. Notice was therefore considered to have been provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and applicable sections of the Huntsville Official Plan. And with that, we're going to our first application, the Brooks application, and Madeline's going to speak to that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, the subject property is located at 1393 Burnell Road. The lot is designated rural in the town of Huntsville's official plan and is under the Rural and Urban Business Employment Precinct with a flood zone overlay and natural constraints 2 overlay in the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. The applicant is proposing to recognize the conversion of a 115 square meter single detached dwelling into 4 dwelling units for the purpose of creating staff accommodation for the employees of a kennel business known as Happy Tails. To facilitate this, an application was submitted for a community planning permit bylaw amendment to change the precinct on the lot from urban business employment precinct to an urban business employment with exception precinct. The exception has been proposed to add 4 staff accommodation units within an existing building as an additional permitted accessory use on the lands, and include a site-specific definition for staff accommodation units, being accommodation which may contain cooking facilities for employees of the primary kennel business. Under the previous zoning bylaw, the lands were under the M1 light industrial zone. Upon implementation of the community planning permit bylaw, the M1 zone was removed and replaced by the urban business employment precinct, which generally captures the same types of uses and permissions, one of which is allowing a kennel use as a permitted primary use. The Urban Business Employment Precinct also permits a dwelling unit as a permitted accessory use on the second story of a building. In this instance, the applicant has one compliant dwelling unit on the property, but has converted an existing single detached dwelling into 4 separate units, which are not permitted as of right in the UBE precinct. The rural designation is predominantly a natural forested landscape with varied topography and low density development. Rural businesses include commercial and industrial uses that are rural resource related to outdoor recreation, tourist, commercial, and space extensive that would not generally be appropriate in settlement areas. In this instance, the applicant is not proposing to change the existing primary rural business use on the lot, but rather seeking to add an additional permitted use to accommodate hired employees that assist with running the kennel business to be housed on the property. The application does not involve further development on the lands as the staff accommodation units have been configured within an existing building on the lot. The majority of the majority of the property has remained in a natural state as a dense vegetated woodlot, and the majority of development is contained to the southern portion of the property. The property is serviced by private well and septic systems, and the applicant is working with the building department to install a new septic system and ensure compliance overall. Natural constraint mapping identifies sloping, cold water stream, flood-prone lands. As no additional development is being proposed, the area that contains development is flat, sufficiently sited from the cold water stream, and is outside of the flood-prone lands. It appears that impacts to the identified natural constraints have been mitigated. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. District staff noted that they would not be opposed to the approval of the application, provided that the applicant confirm a commercial entrance permit has been issued for access onto the district road, and the applicants are working with the district on this, and their comments were included in the report package. The applicant also submitted 5 letters of support with the application, and those were also included within the report package. And through staff's review and analysis, the application appears to meet the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial planning statement, and as such, staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for that. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments.
Good afternoon, members of council. Savas Veratis, Plan Muskoka, PO Box 534, Huntsville, Ontario, P1H2K7. I don't really have too much to add. I'm just here as representing Ms. Brooks, who's located behind me here in the gallery. I think staff have outlined the application correctly, and really what we're dealing with here is just a proposal that will allow the support like a local business that's been operating for some time in Huntsville. The main concern that we had with fashioning the application was to make sure that the 4 units would not be able to be used as a multi-residential land use in the future. And I think through the definition and clarity in the bylaw that's being proposed, that's not going to be the case. So that's all I really have to add. I'd be happy to answer any questions. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Would any member of the public like to make any comments about this? Present or electronically, you'd have to raise your electronic hand if you'd like to speak. I see no.
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
No hands there. Council members. Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Stone. And it is not a question, it's really a comment. I just absolutely support this application. And thank you, I commend the owner of the operation for providing 4 new units for staff. I think that's fantastic, and really appreciate your effort in this area. So thank you.
Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair Stone. I just want to echo that. I think it's great to see someone showing some initiative and creating housing for their own staff instead of taking up the housing market. So it's great, good news, and congratulations on your business. Great.
Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and thank you for the report. I guess my question was answered because I did have a question about future use of those buildings, and so they will not be used for any kind of residential they're only for staff right now, but in the future, if the business is sold, is it going to be used for residential accommodations?
Madeline?
Through you, Chair Stone, that's a great question. Thank you. So the way that the site-specific exception is worded is that those staff accommodation units are directly tied to the kennel business. If that business were to change, they would be required to come back and reconfigure the way that exception is worded.
Great. Thank you for that. I see no other hands. Moved by Deputy Mayor Armour, seconded by Councillor Clark. Be it resolved that Planning Council approve Community Planning Permit Bylaw Amendment Application, CPPA 17-2025 HTE, the purpose and effect of which to amend a portion of the precinct on the lot from an urban business employment precinct to an urban business employment with exception precinct, to add 4 staff accommodation units within the existing 115 square meter building as an additional permitted accessory use on the lands, and include a site-specific definition for staff accommodation units, being accommodations which can contain cooking facilities for employees of the primary kennel business. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that carries unanimously. All right, Kelsey, you're going to speak to the Jones application on Golf Course Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 325 Golf Course Road. The property is within the urban residential, it's within the urban residential designation in the official plan, and it's within the development precinct within the community planning permit with natural constraint 2 overlay. The applicant is proposing to amend the precinct on the subject lands from development to urban residential with exception XXXX precinct to reduce the area and frontage requirements for the severed and retained lands, on which will be on private individual water, sewer, and sewer services. The severed and retained lands are proposed to have a 0.41 hectares in area and 38 meters of frontage along Golf Course Road. So you can see the 2 lots here. The retained is to the bottom and then the severed to the top. There's an existing dwelling on the retained. The development precinct limits uses to only what exists prior to the passage of the community planning permit bylaw. So development is prohibited unless it existed prior. The proposed urban residential 1 precinct also does not provide a minimum area standards as it's supposed to be as of existing. As the property is proposed to be privately serviced, the amendment is needed to establish a minimum lot area. There is also a minimum frontage standard for the UR1 precinct, which is 60 meters for privately serviced lots. The severed and retained lots would have 38 meters of frontage on Golf Course Road, so both would require an exception for frontage. The CPP bylaw also states that in the urban serviced area, no person shall use any land or develop any building or structure unless there's municipal water or sanitary sewer facilities available. There are exceptions for existing lots within single service or future service areas to permit 1 single detached dwelling provided it meets the criteria. Although amending the precinct to UR1 would only permit a single detached dwelling and the development envelope could accommodate these services, the intention of the CPP provision is for an existing lot of record. The CPP bylaw is generally unsupportive of new development within single service or future service areas. Looking at the official plan, the subject lands are within the urban residential designation, and in this location where it's not yet serviced, provided there's some infill development permitted, but provided it meets the criteria. Infill development is defined as forms of development within established areas that have not previously been built up, where small constrained sites can be allowed for rounding out a development. In this case, this is a larger lot, and this lot does not represent infill, and further extensions to privately serviced development within the urban area is not recommended. District comments also support that this proposal would not be infill, and would not support this application and concludes it does not comply with the Muskoka official plan. The application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act and in accordance with the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. There were no public comments received. Through staff's review and analysis, the application would appear not to conform with the intent of the official plan or be consistent with the provincial planning statement, and therefore staff are recommending denial. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll call on the applicant or their representative to make any comments.
Good afternoon, Chair Stone, Committee, Lanny Dennis, Planning Box 254, Nova, Ontario, P0A1R0. I represent the owner. Appreciate the efforts of staff bringing the application forward and their comments. Just wanted to take a few minutes here to address staff's comments and provide what I see the merits of the proposal being. Well, first, it's located in the urban settlement area. There's going to be one new lot to accommodate one new much needed dwelling. It's obviously adding to the tax base and will contribute to municipal services that are already existing that run by the property. It's in an area where there are other urban residential properties, and in fact, not that long ago, there have been two recent severances for two new lots on the opposite side, on the east side of Golf Course Road, with similar frontage and area to these lots. It doesn't offend any natural heritage features on the property. The building envelope proposed is very flat, and it's got good access off of Golf Course Road. And in my opinion, it is an infilling situation or minor rounding out. With respect to the district policies, I thought that their policies were somewhat flexible as they applied to the urban settlement lands for private services on a limited scale. I just wanted to quote a couple of OP policies here. This is section 15D15.2. Says municipal sewage services and municipal water services are the preferred form of servicing for urban centers. Intensification and redevelopment within urban centers on existing municipal sewage services and water services should be promoted wherever feasible. I just wanted to touch base on that. It says preferred means. It does not an absolute number. It also says where feasible. And the services, municipal water and sewer services, are quite some distance from this particular property. Extending those services along Golf Course Road to get there would be cost prohibitive. Just wanted to touch base on another district policy, C15.2D. It states minor adjustments to service areas to enable infill and minor rounding out may be permitted without amendment to this plan, provided that they are in general conformity with the with Schedule B. Just on this note, it's one new lot where there has been and is existing residential properties. And again, I'll reiterate the fact that, in my opinion, it is an infilling or minor rounding out of property within the urban settlement boundary. The last one I wanted to point to was D15.2 F. States it's the intent of the plan that single and future service areas will ultimately be provided with full municipal service over time. Fair enough. Until that occurs, private, individual, on-site, or partial services may be permitted, provided that the conditions are suitable and in accordance with the provisions of this plan. So again, there's a little bit of flexibility offered there in certain circumstances. It's not saying you have to have municipal water and sanitary sewer services available, but that they can proceed provided the lot can accommodate the intended development. We had a surveyor go out, identify a building envelope for the vacant severed lot, and there didn't appear to be any issues with respect to future development of that property. As indicated by the planner, the town also has policies similar to that of the district. In fact, it might even be a bit more test if you put it to that. Section E217 states development of existing lots of record, infill development may be permitted within Huntsville urban settlement area where municipal water and sanitary sewer services are not currently or immediately available and where no present or immediately foreseeable water and sanitary sewer problem would be further compounded. So again, you go through the test, it looks at the amount of effluent to be produced is to be low so a low quantity of effluent, so a single family dwelling, doesn't interfere with the future connection for municipal services. Any services along there would in all likelihood come along Golf Course Road. It doesn't take away from the fact that the lot could be further subdivided in the future. The lot has 38 meters of frontage, roughly 1 acre of land. The zoning that would be applied would be the low density zone in the town, which has 15 meters of frontage and roughly 5,000 square feet of lot area. So there's ample room for further land division. And even on that note, applying the zoning on the property already increases the density by going from no units to possibly 3. Duplex is permitted, accessory dwelling unit is permitted, and perhaps another one in an accessory. So what I'm saying is that it does allow already, just by changing the zoning, it does increase the density. The third point is the development agreement for future connection. I don't see this being a problem. That could be included in a condition of the severance. Says that you're supposed to have double the lot standards for a new urban lot and designed to be further split. I just reiterated the fact that we do have enough frontage and area for further land division and the increase in density. What I do want to point out in the town's official plan when it comes to new urban lot creation, there is no minimum frontage or area. So the bylaw says one thing, but you can change the bylaw for situations like this. It's set up to, in my opinion, to allow some flexibility where you have these situations where new lot creation could occur without having to do an official plan amendment. Talks about septic disposal. Again, we had the plan done by the surveyor, identified the building envelope. It's on a flat level area. And the last test was any conditions that the district had requested. And of course, we can implement that, although there's none to date, through the consent process. So as you can see, the policy base, in my opinion, provides exemptions, some flexibility and latitude, and allows some discretion on a site-by-site basis. The new lot is infilling and follows, in my opinion, the direction of the town with respect to smaller lot sizes for dwellings, helping with the need for the shortfall in housing. The lands are located in a rather awkward policy position. They're in a settlement area where development is expected and to go to ensure the vitality of the community, but yet the policies suggest, in most cases, that you have to be connected to municipal water and sanitary sewer, albeit there are exemptions. So I think that discretion could be applied using these policies. Waiting for this municipal services to be extended doesn't help the immediate need for the shortfall of housing in the community. And I sometimes wonder if we have these exemptions in our official plans, I'm just wondering, we should be exercising our ability to use these to provide exemptions. Anyway, so I would respectfully request committee approve the applications. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this application? Anyone online?
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
Thanks very much. Council members, comments or questions? Councillor Cloutier.
It's wrecking the place. Through your chair still. I look at this and I see it's another rural dwelling in a populated area, like you said. We did approve a smaller one across the road. So I'd have a hard time turning this one down, giving the building envelope size that's on this lot is quite sufficient to what's there right now. The only thing that bothers me is how close the septic system of the existing property is to the property line. I don't know what the rules are on that, Richard, or
Kelsey?
It's 3 meters. Thank you for the question. It's 3 meters, so it is a bit close. So that was going to be one of our comments if it was to be the property line to be shifted if needed.
okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't have a problem with this one.
Any other comments? Councillor Clark?
Thanks, Sheriff Stone. I'm going to have to agree with our planning department on the recommendation on this one. 124 feet frontage is well under the 198 feet that I would consider to be the minimum requirement. And although there's just under an acre, you know, it looks to me like a very small building envelope as the majority of the property runs behind the existing property. And just in regards to Councillor Cluche's comment, I wasn't in support of that other lot that was across the road, so probably won't be in favor of this one.
Any other comments from council? Councillor Fitzgerald?
Well, I think I have to agree with Councillor Cloutier on this one. Ever since I've had the ability to decide on these things, I think when we have the opportunity to create a lot where services can be fit on the lot, that it should happen. So I would second Councillor Cloutier's motion.
Kelsey, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point of clarification, and any of my colleagues could correct me if I'm wrong, but for the UR1, we do allow secondary residential dwelling units, but this is not in a serviced area, so that wouldn't be a permitted use as of right. So just to clarify that, as Lenny's presentation mentioned, that you could have multiple units.
Councillor Renwick?
Thank you, Chair Stone. Thank you, Kelsey, for that. But so you're saying that this would have to be a single unit dwelling. It could not be in future a double or okay. If I may, just follow up, and I would also have to agree with my councillors across the way. I did approve the one that happened on Golf Course Road in previous times, or a previous meeting. It's difficult when staff come to us and give us a denial for very good reasons, but knowing that we have a shortage of lot spaces and lots of homes, it just makes sense that in 10 or 15 years, this is going to be a developed area. And I think if we are being proactive and not just thinking within our little term now, but in 10 or 15 years, this is going to be an area where we'll have services. So I think to be proactive, I would agree with this, that this should become a severed lot and that we should build on it. So I would approve your motion.
Councillor Morrison?
Would that mean you need an amendment or something, I think, right? But I guess I thought by provincial law that everyone was allowed to have 3 units on a lot. Is there something I'm missing?
Director Maxwell?
Thank you, Chair Stone. The province has said on any urban serviced residential lot, so municipal services. Huntsville has gone a step over and above that, and we allow it in the rural areas, but subject to minimum lot size and lot area. And I was going to check and find the provisions so that we can confirm what Kelsey was.
And I guess speaking of that, we allow them in the rural lot. We allow them in the one urban zoning. Maybe it's something we need to look at so that it's covering all of the land and there's not just this one zoning that doesn't allow it. So something to think about.
Manager Clark?
Sorry, it's just further to Director Maxwell's point of clarification. So because I think what's being asked for here is a site-specific exception to permit a lot of a certain area, then this lot would de facto, if you decided to approve this, meet the lot area. So that would mean secondary residential dwelling units could be permitted on the property.
All right. I don't see any other hands. If someone would like to put forward an amendment, I can entertain that, or I can read the motion. Councillor Cloutier? All right.
I'd like to, for approval, amendment for approval.
Okay.
of the lot.
And do you have a seconder? Councillor Fitzgerald. All right, I won't read the original motion, which is in your package, which recommends denial. And this is a motion to substitute. Moved by Councillor Cloutier, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that Planning Council substitute motion DEV 2025-63 CPPA 14 2025 HTE Jones 325 Golf Course Road for the following. Be it resolved that Planning Council approve Community Planning Permit Bylaw Amendment Application CPPA 14 2025 HTE, the purpose and effect of which to change the precinct on a portion of the lot from a development precinct to an urban residential low with exception precinct and an urban residential low exception precinct, with exceptions being two. Permit a lot within a minimum lot frontage of 38 meters and a minimum lot area of 0.4 hectares. Permit a single detached dwelling on a lot serviced by private individual on-site water and sewage services, and require that the following be addressed to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services or designate through a community planning permit prior to the development proceeding on the lot. Confirmation being provided from a qualified professional to demonstrate that the lot is suitable for installation of individual on-site water and sewage services, and that the lot and on-site sewage disposal system is designed in a manner that facilitates future connection to municipal services. And the other exception is to permit a lot with a minimum lot frontage of 38 meters and a minimum lot area of 0.4 hectares, and permit a single detached dwelling on a lot serviced by private individual on-site water and sewage services. Is there any discussion, comments, or questions? All in favor? All opposed? And that carries. And now the main motion as substituted. All in favor? All opposed? And that carries. Oh, I've been told I have to read this now. For consent application B11 2025 HTE to provide in the report, the motion to deny the consent is now withdrawn as the amendment has been approved by Planning Council and no objections have been received. Therefore, the Director of Development Services has the delegated authority to approve the consent. All right. And Lisa is here to speak to the next application on Greer Road.
Thank you, Chair Stone. And through you, the subject property for this application is 21 Greer Road. The property is within the Port Sydney Community Settlement Area, Community Business Designation in the official plan, and the Community and Rural Business Employment CRBE Precinct in the Community Planning Permit Bylaw, with natural constraint overlays indicating a cold water stream. Integrated watershed management mapping prepared for the district also indicates areas of wetlands across much of the property. The property is located at the corner of Greer Road, which is a municipal rural collector road, and South Mary Lake Road, which is a Class C district road. The purpose and effect of this application is to change the precinct on a portion of the lands from a Community and Rural Business Employment CRBE precinct to CRBE with exceptions to permit two undersized CRBE lots, the proposed severed and proposed retained, which would be created as a result of consent application B07 2025, and to add a conservation precinct to protect the wetland and cold water stream and include a 30-meter buffer to those features. There is an existing site-specific zoning exception on the property, which would be deleted with provisions brought forward as part of the amendment. On screen now is the most recently submitted sketch, which was received yesterday, June 10th, and differs slightly from the one that was in my staff report, but still does not reflect what staff saw on site during each of our two property visits and doesn't explicitly show an area proposed to be put into a conservation precinct. As council is aware, the official plan contains natural heritage system policies to protect natural heritage features and areas, including wetlands, and generally directs development away from these features and hazard lands that are unsuitable for development. Per policies in the OP, staff have asked that the applicant have a qualified professional evaluate and delineate the wetland and determine if the proposed new lot would be suitable for development. It seems the applicants had engaged an environmental consultant at one point in time. However, no study or report has been submitted to the town in support of the application to date. It should be noted that the applicant is proposing to create an already undersized lot, a significant portion of which appears to consist of this natural heritage feature, and that lands within natural heritage features or areas or associated buffers are not to be used for lot area or density calculations, resulting in a much smaller potentially developable area than intended under the CPP policies for CRBE lots. Town staff visited the property on 2 different occasions, as previously mentioned, as part of the review of the application. And based on these property visits and the integrated wetland management mapping, it would appear that none of the site plans currently provided, including the version submitted yesterday, sufficiently delineate the wetland boundary or the lands that should be protected within a 30-meter buffer. None of the property sketches submitted have been prepared by a qualified wetland assessor under the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System as required by the OP. On screen now, we have the most recently submitted property sketch, which is here, showing the blue area as what they've mapped as a wetland, and then the brown line there indicating a 30-meter setback. However, it doesn't indicate a specific area to be put into a conservation precinct. Then we also have the integrated watershed management mapping with the green indicating potential wetland areas, which should be field verified based on their information system. And then we have an aerial photograph from Google Maps. If you can see the portion just kind of where the property line juts along the road, those sections along the road to the north when staff visited the property were all wet, as well as a section kind of in the middle of the property where it is green just behind the sheds, the buildings. There were wet areas through there. You can kind of see a darker shaded area, and none of that was included in the sketch as a wetland area that has been submitted to us. So that's why we're looking to have things field verified by a qualified expert. The integrated wetland management mapping is not precise, but it is a reference tool used to indicate where potential wetlands requiring further information are likely to be located. I've also been informed that the town has received a number of complaints of flooding on properties in the neighborhood, and staff's 2 site visits to the property, as previously noted, indicated wet areas not shown on the sketch submitted by the applicant. All of these further staff's opinion that a qualified wetland assessor under the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System should be brought to the site to determine the extent of the wetland and buffer, which should be put into the conservation precinct as required by the OP. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. The District of Muskoka also provided comments which were received after my report was published, and those were circulated to Planning Council members and the agent prior to today's meeting. The district has asked that Planning Council not approve the application until both a scoped EIS and a traffic impact study are submitted to the town and district for review. The district also indicated that depending on the proposed use on the proposed severed portion, that a hydrogeological study may be requested at the development stage. I also just received MTO comments about an hour before the meeting, stating that the retained lands are in an area designated for future expansion of the MTO highway. So there are certain controls that MTO would want to put in place should the retained lands be further developed. And they also would want certain controls, including no access from that portion of the property to the proposed severed if future development is to occur. Given the analysis of the town's policy and the proposal, staff are not in a position to recommend approval of the application at this time and have brought the file forward at the applicant's request, but for information only.
All right, thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or their representative to make any comments.
Yeah, Lanny, Dennis. I represent the owners. Unfortunately, they couldn't appear this afternoon. I appreciate the efforts of staff discussions we've had with them and working with them over the last little while. Just wanted to take a few minutes to address their staff comments and the merits of the proposal. These are employment lands, and those, as such, they're to be preserved and protected both short and long term as part of the public interest. It's in a settlement area, reflects the general commercial area. The official plan contemplates this area for future growth. The lands are suitable, in my opinion, for development. The retained is already developed, and I believe there's still a large envelope remaining on the severed property, and we've had the OLS a few times out now to map unsatisfactorily the extent of the wetland area and apply the buffer. And of course, the historical use of the land has been commercial. It's been a Smith's gas station for years. I think the crux of the discussion here has to do with the wetland mapping, and that's why a lot of many of the issues that I identified, it's been brought forward for your information because of that. Just to go back from the very beginning of this application, and I know that the pre-consultation, the application is still subject to further review by staff, but an EIS wasn't identified at that time. We were supposed to get a surveyor to go and identify the extent of the wetland area. And, I think that's pretty fundamental to the overall application process. And I think it was generally set up to be fairly straightforward. I think at that time, there was a stream that was noted, I think, on the town's GIS mapping. I don't believe that a wetland was identified on the town's GIS mapping. I'm not sure of this integrated wetland mapping where the genesis of that is. But we did have, notwithstanding the fact that even if a stream does exist, which it doesn't, there's no defined channel through the property. It would be part of the wetland boundary anyways, so it would be protected through the application of conservation zoning. There was initial preliminary discussions with an ecologist, and they had identified the area as a treed swamp, and they recommended a 15-meter buffer be applied. And we've actually gravitated towards a 30-meter buffer, thinking that we'd be more conservative than the original 15 meters that was suggested. So to assist with staff going through this process to try to create a map that accurately identifies the wetland boundary. Just recently, we had the low-level aerial, a drone photography shoot by the OLS to try to identify the wetland boundary, and then georeference that with the survey information. In other words, it's survey quality in terms of where those lines are on the property. I don't believe there's any further work to be done. It's a locally significant wetland. It's in an urban area. We've got a large buffer, and I think there's more than enough area left on the property to be able to build. My experience with doing the field truthing and going out with flagging a wetland and having a surveyor pick up the information has been with a provincially significant wetland, where we actually walked with an ecologist, and at that time M&R, and then the surveyor picked up the information, and that is where it is on the site. Because we're creating a lot, I understand the town's position, staff's position with respect to the envelope. But if you note on the sketch, there is a fairly large area to the south of the severed lot that it's already been cleared. In other words, it's already sort of set up, if you will. It's been an area of disturbance, and that's where development would occur. So the lot itself is roughly 3.5 acres, and I understand that, you know, a lot of it is wetland to the north. But somewhere on that lot, 3.5 acres, there has to be an area, and I've just said where the cleared area was, that you could actually put a building. Certainly, the size of the development envelope will dictate the size of the structure, including the parking that goes on the property. So I'm, with respect to the district comments, I think, Lisa, that they were satisfied with the Hydro G, that we didn't have to do it at this particular time.
The Hydro G could be submitted at the CPP stage should this application move forward.
So on that note, in similar fashion, as we move forward and development is proposed on the property, I would suggest that a future CPP amendment, whatever you want to call it, site plan agreement, would be required. And at that time, the field truthing could be done if need be, and any other study be implemented at that particular time, because there's no proposal at this time for any site-specific development other than we're creating a new commercial property. With respect to the traffic study, that's the first I've heard of it from the district. I don't think it was part of the pre-consultation comments. The zoning is already there. It's already zoned. Like, we're not changing the zoning. We're not adding any uses. We're not deleting any uses. We're not changing any uses. It is what it is. I'm not sure. I just heard the MTO comments. You know, they weighed in on it. I don't know exactly what they're looking for. The retained land seems to be within their corridor management area, but there's no change on that. I suppose if we do something, then we'd have to go back and talk to MTO. And with respect to the severed lands, I didn't sort of, I don't know what it was, Lisa, that picked up on what they were trying to say, whether it was they wanted a building and land use permit at some particular time. Is that what they're alluding to?
Yes, they did say that specifically in their comments.
So that's by normal course. We would do that prior to getting a building permit. So a lot of those detailed stuff will be hammered out when we move forward with the site-specific development of the property. All that to say, I would respectfully request committee approve the applications. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Lisa?
I'd just like to address some of the things that Lanny said that I disagree with, or points of clarification. During the pre-consultation stage, I repeatedly asked that a qualified professional submit a drawing. I repeatedly asked where the wetland information came from. I received some copies of some emails with different bits of information, but never a clarification. Still, I said, okay, I can provide you comments, but we will need this verified. So as we continue to receive material, we continue to ask that a qualified professional provide that to us, and then we received a request that the file be brought forward for your consideration anyway. We have brought it for information purposes because we still have not received this item that we have been asking for throughout the process. Additionally, just to clarify, the IWM integrated watershed mapping came through funding from the province as a directive of the District of Muskoka with the Muskoka Watershed Group to evaluate the watershed as a whole, but different contributing factors including flood plain areas and wetlands, to get a better idea of the health of the watershed in general within the district. And it is something that, as I said, should be field verified, but again, that's the issue, is that it hasn't at this time. Additionally, it's not really appropriate to wait until the development stage for the conservation precinct boundary to be determined, because the whole point is to determine where development can and can't occur, and to put it into a precinct through an amendment, which is what this application is for. So the amendment application is the stage at which that boundary needs to be determined, and whether or not developable lot exists or could exist has to be determined at this stage before we can create a lot and say that it's developable. Additionally, as I mentioned in my opening comments, it is not an OLS's I didn't specifically say that perhaps, but I said an Ontario wetland specialist, I forget the exact name, but they're designated through the MNRF and it's not an OLS. So an OLS is not designated to determine wetland boundaries. As Lanny mentioned previously, when determining provincially significant wetlands, he said that an OLS went with an ecologist. So that has not occurred to my knowledge at this time. I think that's all I have for now.
All right, thank you for that. Is there any member of the public that would like to speak to this application? Anyone online?
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
Thank you. Council members, comments or questions? I'll go to Councillor Morrison first.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you, definitely a more complicated one, lots to think about. And I like where Lisa's coming with protecting the wetlands. We always care about that. A couple of things, if this is going to move forward, I don't see any need for a traffic study whatsoever on Greer Road, with it's already zoned the way it is, and it's one door in on Greer Road. I mean, that would just be a waste of money, and we don't like people wasting money. We don't know what's going to go there. It could be a tiny home. It could be a little tiny commercial business with a home up above. And I've driven there a ton. I lived in behind there once, and the home was built on a slab. There was no basement or whatsoever, and it seems to be what would go in that area. Based on the drawings and everything else I see, if they're doing a 30-meter buffer, even though it's not from the buffer that you'd like to find, there's still a significant piece of land there that can be built on. And to spend all this money now, when there isn't even an application, when down the road, when the actual permit comes, it'll be more defined and you might want more or less. So that's the problem I'm having, is a big cart before the horse. I know the reasoning, because you don't want to create a buildable lot when maybe it's not, but I know that lot well, and I can't imagine it's not buildable, but just my thoughts.
Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I find this an interesting one as well. But I guess the thing from my perspective, and where I concur with staff on this, as to, I don't think that the request of what staff is asking for is outside of the box. The thing about this is the lack of certainty. And, you know, Lanny, you made reference to, it is a large buffer, and totally appreciate that. But it's not relevant if you actually don't know where the boundary is, right? So that one is kind of hard for me to handle. I concur with Councillor Morrison. I'm sure there is a buildable lot, but it's not clear where it is. And I think, Lanny, you commented, somewhere in this property there should be a building envelope. Great, good. But wouldn't it be nice to know where it's acceptable? And I'm really thrilled that Lisa made reference to where the data is from, because it's really current. This was all new material as part of the floodplain mapping exercise that the district received a lot of money for to accomplish throughout the area, and it's really current mapping. So I'm glad we're using that, and I think that that's really important. To me, I think by hearing the issue today is good, but I personally couldn't vote in favor of it, only because I think that we need to see that final information. As far as the traffic study, I concur with Councillor Morrison. I think that is totally unnecessary. But on this one significant issue around the wetland, I think that's really important.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and thanks, Lanny and Lisa, for your presentation there. It's a tricky area. There's a lot of water courses through there. I believe, Director Maxwell, there's medium density scheduled for in that area as well, in the immediate vicinity there.
Thank you. It is on the list of areas that we will be looking to change the permitted uses to allow more residential uses.
Yeah. So clearly the lot has been used for as long as I can remember, and I'm sure as longer people twice my age can remember. So I don't doubt the fact that there can be something built on it. It can be separated. I just, yeah, there's too many gray areas for me which I'm usually pretty pro this, and just define the buffer. And, you know, we could even make that a condition to define it. But I think what the applicant is looking for is some certainty that this can happen before they spend a bunch of money. Because we don't all have a bunch of money to spend, and businesses have changed, you know, just the south entrance into the business has changed the scope of their business. So they're looking at ways to reinvent themselves. And I think we probably owe that to them to make some kind of a commitment saying that we're here with you. We want you to do what you need to do. And if they have that certainty, then do they go out and spend the money on the things that are required? I think that's a reasonable expectation.
Deputy Mayor Armour.
Not to repeat everything that's been said already, just to say that I support staff right now, and I think we need to have the right information before you can make the right decision on this. And we need to actually see a building envelope. So I can't support it right now.
And to your point, Councillor Fitzgerald, I hope the applicant knows that we're willing to have something built there. We just need to know where's appropriate. All right. Councillor Schumacher.
So yes, essentially, I do agree with Councillor Fitzgerald. I mean, looking at, and I did read through that, I think the possible proposal is the laundromat or whatever there, which had been there in the past. And to your point, it has been a business to the time when I went to public school with our current MPP who lived there. So it's been an ongoing envelope. I don't know. I'm torn because I do want to see it move forward. The drone piece that Lanny mentioned, is that inappropriate enough, or we have to do the actual one, Lisa, you're suggesting?
Lisa?
Through you, Chair, thank you for the question. The drone was done by NOLS. They don't have the right tools to evaluate it. To evaluate a wetland, they would need to take soil samples and look at species where those things are existing on the ground. So it's really not an effective tool for that.
Councillor Morrison.
Yeah, and I want to make sure I'm with Deputy Mayor Armour as far as the staff being right. Lisa's definitely right. We need to define these boundaries, so I want to make sure that's clear. But I think it's premature, and to Councillor Fitzgerald's comment, there's no guarantees they'll even get the severance. Even if the EIS comes back perfect, there's no guarantees they're going to get the severance. So we're asking them to spend this money, you know, the time and cost of an EIS, and then we ask them to peer review it. And now we're months down the line and we're further away from getting potential housing and commercial business in Port Sydney, and Port Sydney needs it. So I love the idea of a conditional approval. And we know that our planning staff is not going to allow anything to be built without that boundary being defined. So I think by pushing forward, there's no way we're putting the wetlands in jeopardy. And it actually accomplishes the same mission without jeopardizing what the staff want accomplished.
Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thanks, Chair Stone. Just further to that, I think this is an opportunity where it can still be controlled by staff and the policies. We're committing to the applicant first, that's all. And I don't see anything wrong with that in this type of business environment and climate that we're in. So I would be happy to support a conditional approval.
Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Just, I'm actually going to turn it over to Lisa for 1 second. How would that look if we asked for that kind of direction?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair Stone. Amendments are not something that you can really put conditional approvals on. So if you're doing an amending bylaw, you're changing the bylaw. So I guess the only potential way to do so would be to put a holding provision on until that is determined. I don't know that it's going to save any time in the end, because they would still have to go through our process. It's just not, like, conditions on amendments are not the typical way forward. And once you pass a bylaw amendment, you don't have any further controls really other than that holding provision.
Director Maxwell.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I just also wanted to mention that The application was proposing to apply that conservation precinct to the lot as well. And if it's conditionally approved here at council with the conservation precinct defined, but then when the wetland evaluation is done, that's not where the land should be protected, then the applicant will have to do a second amendment in order to make sure that those areas are properly defined. So that, I think, is another consideration for staff. I don't believe that there is a question as to whether or not the lot could be considered buildable or not based on what they're proposing. But there's also the flip side to it, is that maybe there's a larger area that's available for development, or there's other opportunities on the site once they have that evaluation done. So it's very awkward for staff to say, yeah, we think this is okay, because there really isn't any guarantees that it'll work. And I hate to be in a situation where council has made the decision to approve the consent conditional on these items being addressed, and then there becomes more issues trying to address those items, and then that can also provide opportunity for appeal through the OLT if the conditions cannot be fulfilled. So that's another consideration.
Councillor Schumacher.
Thank you, through you. So I guess what I'm hearing is time is probably going to be the same whether we go through and do this process now or and it's not that staff are not supporting the applicant, because I think that's what kind of we were trying to get our heads around, is that you guys are still supporting the applicant to go ahead and do this process. Let's just do it the way and well, and so yeah, okay.
Councillor Cluche.
I like we say, we want to support that, but I think the big thing here too is you got to sit back and you got to look at what the MTO are going to want, because and that'll good luck with that. But I don't, you go ahead here and do a whole bunch of stuff and they step in at the last minute and it's all for naught. So I think maybe they should look at and try and get an answer from the MTO what exactly is going to happen there. Because if they might go ahead and spend a whole lot of money and we might approve a whole lot of stuff and that's not worth for anything.
Councillor Morrison.
Just a comment about the not saving any time. I don't think that's the intent of what Councillor Fitzgerald was saying. It's the fact that it's the money and everything else, spending the money and not knowing you're getting a severance. So if it's still going to take the same amount of time, that's fine. If there's a holding provision that's no problem. But we're not telling them to go to spend 20, 30, 40 grand and a bunch of months of their time and then come back and say, we've looked at it and we're not going to approve the severance. That's the big thing for me. To expect someone to do that doesn't make a whole pile of sense. But having a holding provision on, and even to Director Maxwell's point, if the holding provision is on there and we maybe don't define the boundary yet, that's to be defined when an application comes. There's something along those lines that would make more sense for me. But
Director Maxwell?
Sorry, thank you. We would have to define the boundary now, because that's the zoning itself is what does that. It defines the boundaries of where the conservation boundary ends and the developable area would start, regardless of what buffers are being added to it. So unless we're being incredibly conservative and then pushing the boundary right, I don't even know where it could feasibly go based on the pictures and Lisa's site visit showing where there was still wet, boggy areas on the property. It's very difficult to be confident that we wouldn't be causing more harm or doing something inappropriate.
Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair Stone. I think what we're seeing here through the conversation is that there's a lot of uncertainty with this application, and I think there needs to be certainty to move forward. So I would need a certain level of certainty in order to be comfortable to allow things to move forward. I don't feel that right now.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Chair Stone. And I like all the comments and great conversation we're having about this. In response to Director Maxwell's comment, I think it's probably, in hindsight, a good thing to go with the study, because if we do something now, we may limit the size of the property to half of what it is. And that I don't think that's probably not in anybody's best interest, whether it be for the public or the applicant or the users of whatever it's going to be. So either way, I think the study has to be done, and this creates more opportunity for a greater size lot and more usable space.
All right. Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks very much. Just one very quick one. So do they actually have to sever it and rezone it to build this, or is there enough property there, including what's currently there, to put a laundromat on? Or are they just trying to sell it? Is that what they're up to?
Mr. Dennis?
No, the idea would be to sever it and sell it. The value of the land isn't as it sits as one parcel. The value of the land sits as two separate properties.
Okay, that just reassures me we need more information.
All right, I see no more hands. This came for information only, so there's no resolution, and we're going to move on. So now that all comments have been received, I declare these public meetings respecting the above applications to be concluded. We will now move into the non-public portion of the meeting. And Lisa's sticking with us for Penny's Lane.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you, the subject property for this application is 86 Penny's Lane. The property is within the waterfront designation in the official plan and the waterfront residential 120-meter WR2 precinct in the community planning permit bylaw. The property does not abut the nearby lake despite being in the WR2 precinct, but is within 30 meters of a cold water stream. This property is accessed via Penny's Lane, which is a private road. The purpose and effect of this application is to permit the construction of an 84.5 meter square, one-story detached garage and provide the following reliefs. Increase the maximum permitted accessory lot coverage from 5% to 5.4%. Permit a garage to be located closer to the front lot line than the principal dwelling. Reduce the minimum required setback to a cold water stream from 30 meters to 22 meters for an 84.5 meter square one-story detached garage, and reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 20 meters to 6 meters for an 84.5 meter square one-story detached garage. When staff visited the property, we noted a number of structures on the neighboring lands within the required 30-meter setback distance of the cold water stream, which appeared to be associated with this property. The owners of the subject property have agreed to remove these as a condition of provisional approval. There is one shed on the subject property that the owners would like to have remain until the garage is built so that they can store some tools and equipment. So a condition of final approval has also been included that the shed on the subject lands be removed prior to building permit issuance. In my staff report, I also neglected to mention an additional tent garage, which you can see in the photos here, on the subject lands. I recommend, that this also be removed as a condition of approval, and we've prepared an alternative resolution to include this should council wish. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. No objections have been received. Given the analysis of the town's policy and the proposal, the application appears to conform with the intent of the official plan, is consistent with the PPS, and meets the applicable criteria for approval under the CPP bylaw. As such, staff are recommending the application be approved, subject to the provisions that the two sheds and the chicken coop associated with the property currently sitting on neighboring lands be removed prior to final approval, and that the existing shed and tent garage currently sitting on the subject property be removed prior to issuance of the building permit. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments that they wish.
Chair Stone, the applicant's online, so I'll bring them into the meeting.
All right, bring them in. Hello there.
Hi, this is Chris Oliver.
Yes.
I'm just here representing Norman Huff, who's put this proposal forward. And I guess really just my comments would be is the conditions for the building permit would be the, let's say the tarp garage as well as the other shed to basically Norm was looking to see if it be removed at the end or as soon as we can get the structure of the garage up if approved so that he can put the contents within the garage that would be there. And then we also in the report there is a condition for a holding deposit for the project to close out as well. So that would be, I guess, more or less really what Norm was looking to seek from this application, is being able to allow his storage to be able to stay in those areas and be able to be relocated to the new garage, closing off the deposit. The other structures that Lisa had brought up have already been removed now.
Lisa, can you comment on the existing structure?
Yes, thank you. And through you, Chair Stone. When we say as a condition of building permit issuance, the intention is the final building permit. So when the building permit is closed out at the end of the process.
Okay, thank you for the clarity.
All right, council members, comments or questions? Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Just a very quick question. Figure 9 in our package, I think it's probably a shadow that is going into the vegetation area. It looks like a shadow. It's not the covered deck that we're looking at, is it? It is a shadow. Do you have?
I would just have to pull it up if you can give me a second here.
Okay, it's not a huge question, but visually it looks like that's the covered deck, but I don't think it is. I think the covered deck is under the. Sorry. Stop.
Yeah, it looks like a shadow.
Yeah. I could show you online. Okay. That section right there. At least it's right there. Because it's in
Is that part of the fence?
That's part of the house.
Yeah. That is?
I see. That is the deck attached to the house, I believe. Yes.
So if I may, so that covered deck goes into that revegetation area, correct? Is that? Sorry. See there? That section there? I thought that was the covered deck. I think it's a shadow, but anyway.
Yeah, it could be that peak there, Lisa.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's difficult to tell, but Chris may be able to elaborate. If I can speak to Chris, it's the drawing that you provided with the revegetation from the study. So I don't know if you could help clarify.
Rebecca, I've got to let me just pull up the report. That's shadow. The line of that gable, the line of the revegetation area is parallel to the front of the deck. So that line, those two dark areas would be shadow from the GIS.
Great. Thank you so much.
Extraction of the picture there.
All right, any other comments from council? All right, seeing none. Right. Okay, we have a minor amendment here. Addition. So the motion is exactly as it's shown in the agenda. However, we do have this. Moved by Mayor Alcock, seconded by Deputy Mayor Armour. Be it resolved that the following words and tent garage be added after existing sheds in item number 2 of the last paragraph. So it's simply the addition to remove the tent garage as part of this application. So as far as that addition to the motion goes, comments, questions, all in favor? And that carries. And now I'll ask the main motion as amended. All in favor? And that carries. All right. Thank you for that. Lisa, you're sticking with us again. Fairy Lake Road. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you, the subject property for this application is 389 South Fairy Lake Road. The property is within the waterfront designation in the official plan and the waterfront residential 120-meter WR2 precinct in the community planning permit bylaw. The owners are in the process of purchasing the original shore road allowance, which abuts Fairy Lake, which is a cold water lake, and the entire frontage consists of type 1 fish habitat. The original shore road allowance consists of steep slopes as well. The property is accessed via South Berry Lake Road, which is a private road in this location. The purpose and effect of this application is to permit the construction of a 58-meter square one-story detached garage and to recognize an existing 15-meter long retaining wall and provide the following reliefs. Reduce the minimum required setback to type 1 fish habitat and a cold water lake from 30 meters to 9 meters for the retaining wall, and permit the construction of the retaining wall on a steep slope within the shoreline buffer. Originally, the applicant applied to rebuild the garage, and town staff worked with the applicant to come up with a plan for the garage that would comply with non-complying building policies of the CPP bylaw, while improving on the situation by increasing the setback from the side yard where it currently sits on the property line. While reviewing the application, however, staff noted the shoreline was not owned by the applicant and that it contains a number of structures which are not in compliance with the town's CPP bylaw provisions for shoreline buffers and shoreline activity areas. You can see on the screen now a neighboring retaining wall over here, a portion of which crosses the property line, which unfortunately contributes to the applicant's shoreline activity area width, as well as the retaining wall, which they have built on the property, well, on the original shore road allowance, which will become part of the property without approval from the town. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and the CPP bylaw. No objections have been received. Given the analysis of the town's policy and the proposal, with the inclusion of the recommended condition of approval requiring revegetation of the shoreline buffer, the application appears to conform with the intent of the OP, be consistent with the PPS, and meet the applicable criteria for approval under the CPP bylaw. As such, staff are recommending the application be approved, subject to the revegetation plan being received to the satisfaction of the town.
Thank you. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chair, Mayor, and Council. My name is Jennifer O'Connell. I'm representing the applicant. My address is 2087 Erin Gate Boulevard in Pickering, Ontario. Thank you for the opportunity to present. The applicants are in support of the staff report and thank staff for your help. This is a private residence, so they've appreciated working with you, Lisa, and Councillor Cloutier for your help in assisting them bring the property into compliance. As already noted, part of the condition is a neighboring retaining wall and dock that the applicants are fine to maintain. Their neighbors, all abutting neighbors, are supportive of the application. They have spoken to them. I would just note that the pictures taken were in the winter. So if you saw the vegetation today, from the shoreline, you would actually not see much of that retaining wall. And so they are supportive of a landscape plan or any sort of vegetation to enhance that. The one thing that we would ask is that we did submit a conceptual landscape plan based on local conservation guidelines. We did not receive any feedback, which is understandable. I understand that that's not done in this process, but we would just ask that we could come to an agreement on that site plan so that we don't miss the planting season or construction season. And so all we ask is just some assurance on the back and forth, if there is any, and that if we could get feedback on our conceptual plan. Other than that, we are just really appreciative of, again, planning staff for meeting on site, Councillor, and for the consideration.
Thanks for that. Lisa, did you want to comment about getting things in place early?
Sure. Thank you, and through you, Chair Stone. So once the approval is granted by council here, we would get back to you on the fine details of that planting plan. If I missed reviewing it, it was because of other deadlines working through, so I apologize for that.
Excellent. Council members, comments, questions? Councillor Cloutier.
Through you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Lisa. A lot of work has gone into this. A few site visits with Richard and everybody involved. The existing garage that's there now, doesn't comply. It's a little closer. They were gonna build, originally had asked for a little bit bigger one, but then when they realized it was too close to the property line, they downsized the garage as per staff requests. All this came about of a garage that's in the front of the house. Has nothing to do on the water side, but certain situations came up. The neighbor's dock, the way it is, the way the wall is, it was just built like that. I mean, it's been there for a long time. They're fully in compliant of planting any vegetation that's required. They certainly want to keep the land, you know, as natural as possible on the shoreline. If you look on the boundaries, how it juts in, it seems to be the way the water has come around and wore out the erosion over the years, the hundreds of years that it's been there, for the original water's edge where it is. So, like I said, they're very compliant. They've tried to not do anything underhanded this whole situation, and they've been totally above board, and so is our staff.
Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone. And just a question, I guess, was the wall built before or by the applicant, or was it an existing wall? Not the one the neighbor's one, but the one that's actually on the property?
It was built by the applicant, replacing an existing retaining wall, but it was so dilapidated and built into the ground that we couldn't find photos to properly represent it, and we couldn't find aerial photos to properly represent what was there. It was the old railway tie style and quite dangerous. They have 2 young kids. This is a personal property. So in fairness, they did not anticipate needing a building permit to replace that and did not take photos of the site condition. So that's why we're not disputing that. We understand that we can't demonstrate that with any visuals. So this is why they've come in just fully to bring it into compliance. But that is why it was originally built. It was to replace kind of the dangerous situation that had grown into the land and was hard to see, you know, from any visuals that they had of the site.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to follow up, so where that wall is positioned, I'm assuming that there was some kind of erosion of the land, so they just sort of grandfathered, made another one. So I understand it. I don't like it, but I do understand why it was theirs.
If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. They totally appreciate that and would have come in advance but they did just assume that because it had existed and they were worried about erosion. The shoreline area right in front of the wall, there are some mature trees that they love and do not want to lose, but if you're on site, you can actually see, you know, erosion, but they are newer property owners. They've only owned the property in the last few years. So they are kind of now developing and trying to maintain the natural state.
All right, I see no other hands. So, moved by Mayor Alcock, seconded by Councillor Morrison, be it resolved that Planning Council provisionally approve Community Planning Permit Application CPP 6625 2025 HTE. And I'm not going to read all of this. It's quite lengthy. It's exactly as it was in the package. And I will ask the question. All in favor? And that carries. All right. I think Kelsey's coming up to speak to the John Street application. All right. We'll take a 5-minute break. I know you're holding it. All right, welcome back, everyone. All right, Kelsey, you can go ahead with the John Street application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 7 John Street. The property is within the Central Business District designation in the official plan and within the Central Business District precinct under the CPP with a site-specific exception and natural constraint to overlay. The applicant is proposing a temporary 50-occupant outdoor restaurant for a 3-year period commencing on the date of the community planning permit issuance with 4 refreshment stands, including with a beverage stand, 1 portable washroom facility, and decks for outdoor seating. There's a number of variations, which you could see on your screen. There has been a change from the initial proposal. So there was originally 7, and now there's 5. So one of them being a beverage refreshment stand, and there is a toilet facility or washroom facility at the top, as you could see here. But most of the other variations remain the same. At the April meeting, Planning Council reviewed this application. Planning Council discussed requirements for the traffic impact brief, the required 6-meter stormwater easement, the previous approved site plans, the number of refreshment vehicles or refreshment stands, parking concerns and considerations, and accessibility. So as I noted, the plan has since changed. So that means there's no longer a relief needed for the number of spaces required. However, there's still relief needed for the spaces and the reduced aisle widths and length of spaces. Although this was absent in the recirculation, this was shown continually on the sketch. So further recirculation was not deemed necessary. Staff have continued to ask for the traffic impact brief and the 6-meter easement for the town stormwater management drain, and these items have not been agreed to or provided. There were previous refreshment stands on the site, as you can see in this photo. There are some there today. So this would be a continued use, similar use. However, this would now collectively establish this outdoor restaurant use. The development will improve the appearance of the prominent site by revegetating the shoreline and adding the decking. However, the use of refreshment stands, remains reminiscent of this previous development. The use will also only be allowed for a temporary period, being 3 years, and this temporary nature makes it a more appropriate proposal. As mentioned, the parking lot is existing, but relief is needed to accommodate this new outdoor restaurant use. As mentioned, the existing site considerations are a unique consideration given the large vehicles we often have in Huntsville. The applicant, it did reduce the capacity of the restaurant, reducing from 70 seats to 50. So the number of parking spaces can be met in the existing facility with these other reliefs needed. The reduction in seating addresses some of the limitations. However, staff recommend a condition for 2 designated accessible spaces and accessibility ramps to be added. This is a provisional condition to address the accessibility concerns of Planning Council at the last meeting. Staff also continue to request the traffic impact brief as a condition of provisional approval to ensure that vehicle movement, both internal and external of the site, is reviewed and any recommended measures are implemented in the CPP. Additionally, it was recommended as a provisional condition that docking spaces be available for this use, a minimum of 14. The town continued to request the 6-meter wide easement instead of the proposed 3-meter wide easement. And it also appears that some of the decking is shown to be within that 3-meter easement that was suggested. By refusing this requirement, the proposal does not count for this unique consideration of the site, and therefore staff included this as a condition of provisional approval, that it be 6 meters and the plans be adjusted accordingly. So you could see in this picture, you could kind of see the riprap. So that's where it is, that outlet there. So we would need 6 meters, and that's for access. And operations has provided the comment that 6 meters would definitely be needed. see. To address the flood hazard, a flood impact review was, as noted in my previous presentation, was provided from Pinestone. The review recommended that the design of the deck structures be carried out by a structural engineer as a condition of securing a building permit for the site. Therefore, the flood hazard can be mitigated through the structural design. In increasing the cumulative width of the shoreline area and reducing the front yard setbacks, there are potential impacts to the Muskoka River. In this instance, the shoreline has been disrupted by existing development, and the existing shoreline activity area is 117.6 meters. So to achieve a net improvement, revegetation is provided along the shoreline, which will enhance the existing conditions to reduce further impacts to the Muskoka River. Staff also recommend retention of existing trees. So you can kind of see in this photo and the previous photos that there are a number of existing trees. Excuse me. So that's included as a recommendation of provisional approval. The application was recirculated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and the Community Planning Permit Bylaw, and to the Fairy Lake and sorry, it's happening again where I might need to take a sip of water. 2 seconds. Thank you so much. So the application was to recirculated in accordance with the provisions of this Community Planning Permit Bylaw and with the Planning Act, as well as to the Fairy Lake and Lake Vernon Lake Associations. 5 letters of objection were received for the recirculation. The objections were provided to council prior to the meeting. The objections relate to parking, traffic, and the number of stands, fences, and the impacts to abutting businesses. Some of the concerns would be addressed in through the conditions that we're proposing, but there are those outstanding concerns. Through the review and staff analysis, the application would appear to conform with the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial planning statement, and therefore staff are recommending provisional approval. Please note that staff would not be supportive of the proposal if any of the conditions recommended are removed. It's also worth noting one of the conditions is for a replacement agreement. So there's a bit of history, and I've included some slides. So there's the site-specific exception for the lot, which has these current development rights, as you could see on this. So this is the property detail sketch from the 1988 zoning bylaw amendment. So those continue to apply on the lands, whether this is, despite this CPP. And there was previous site plan approvals. So from 1988 to 2008, there's been different iterations of site plans. So this is the most current site plan from 2018. And as you could see, some of the orientations of the parking wouldn't meet today's standards. So as there has been other replacement agreements, we do think it's reasonable to ask for one to implement all these conditions that we're recommending as a part of our recommendation. So thank you so much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll go to the applicant or the representative first. Sorry.
Status for as a Plan Muskoka. I'm here representing the applicants as their agent and a professional planner. I thank staff for their work on this one. It's been a complicated one coming to this point. I do have some things I want to add. I won't reiterate what's been said in terms of the nature of the proposal, but I think everybody understands what's being proposed. One of the overarching sort of statements that the applicants wanted me to portray to council here today is that this is a temporary permission that's being requested of the council to approve here. It's not a permanent land use or a permanent use of the land in terms of the decking that's being proposed that's being requested. It's temporary, so they're hoping that council sees it in that light in terms of the requests for further changes to the conditions that are being proposed by staff. There is a site plan agreement on title, as was just shown, permitting the construction of a permanent building and parking area in the general location of the proposal as well. That needs to be taken in consideration as well. The changes made from the previous time that the application was in front of council, it reduced the food trucks from 7 to 5. That's 4 trucks and 1 beverage truck and reduce the seating to 50 50 spaces or picnic tables, I guess you could say, seating, which makes the existing parking count compliant. The variations proposed simply seek to recognize existing parking lot dimensions and accommodate the construction of proposed decks. In terms of the conditions, the applicants are happy that staff recommended the approval of the application, but they have issues with pretty much every condition that's being proposed. Again, they wanted to reiterate that we're taking this in the context, this is a temporary permission being requested. So the first one is the traffic study. The previous stance was that the lot has been historically being used to its maximum vehicle potential, and that this would not add any more vehicle movement to the site. Now that the seating has been reduced, the actual parking count is compliant. That remains the case, and in fact, the existing parking lot can accommodate both the existing use of the land and the lands being proposed as well too. So they asked that that condition be waived. The development agreement, it proposes to remove and replace the existing development agreement on site, which they have an obvious issue with. That development agreement, that site plan agreement has value to the site, and there was never the intention to remove it and replace it, particularly with a temporary land use being proposed to do so. So they wholeheartedly disagree to entering into an agreement that would do such a thing. The 6-meter drainage easement, they maintain that the feature is 3 meters wide, and they'd be able to accommodate the future access to the site using a 3-meter easement. So they do not wish to provide a 6-meter easement, just a 3-meter easement. The changes to the site plan being proposed through the condition by staff, a lot of it relates to the revegetation of the site and the retention of the vegetation on the site. The plan itself already proposes numerous shrubs to be planted between the shoreline deck that's being proposed and the shoreline itself, and they feel that that is sufficient for the temporary nature of the proposal. There's also seeks to retain the trees that are within the site by building the deck in and around them, and also primarily retaining the vegetation buffer at the north end of the site between the residences to the north and the property to the south. So they believe that that's being satisfied and doesn't need a condition to make any changes to the site plan any further. Another thing that they've mentioned about that is the alterations being proposed as one of the conditions to the shoreline to remove existing boulders and replace it with vegetation. Again, they didn't want to get into that sort of amount of development in terms of alteration to the site itself along the shoreline, so they have requested that the condition be waived as well too. In all the other matters, in terms of maximum number of seating on the site and signage can just have been agreed to, and they feel that the existing site plan, and that's shown on the application in terms of how it addresses the proposal, and if implemented the way it is today, satisfies those conditions raised by staff. So in conclusion, the CPP permit seeks permission to temporarily construct 2 decks attached by a bridge that will facilitate an outdoor restaurant use on a property that already permits such a use, and in an area of the site that already permits a permanent building and parking area. That is the context of this application, and that's what's being considered here today. In that context, the applicants are requesting that the council approve the CPP permit with all conditions waived, other than the requirement for a 3-meter drainage easement rather than a 6-meter drainage easement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 2 deputations, and the first one is Mr. Garcia and Kapoor. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, honorable council members. My name is Mauricio Garcia. I'm the general manager of the Boston Pizza, located at 7 John Street here in Huntsville. We're a long-lasting, standing tenant, year-round operators on this property. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today on behalf of our ownership and our team. I'm here to express our strong objection to the proposed variance application. This proposal, if approved, would have serious consequences, not just for our business, but for every permanent tenant and for the integrity of this area as a whole. Let me be clear, this isn't about resisting change. It's about ensuring that any change is fair, legal, and sustainable for everyone. Here are the key reasons why we are opposing to this proposal. First, No traffic or impact study has been completed. Sorry. This is a major oversight. The proposal would bring in more vehicles, more people, and more congestions without any plan for how to handle it. That's just not an inconvenience. That's a public safety concern. I understand what he was saying, especially about not needing from 7 to 5, and we're meeting the parking permits. Our patio opens up in the summer. That's over 300 seats. Did he account for that? I don't think so. Second, the city bylaw is clear on only 2 food trucks are permitted. The proposal exceeds that limit. Allowing more would go directly against the law. Businesses like ours have followed for years. And if one applicant can ignore the rules, so what's to stop the others? The dock slips are privately rented all summer long. No one can come in through boats, park there, and come to order food, as it was previously stated in the last meeting. That's completely false to say that the slips will help any parking when it won't. The only ones that'll be basically have issues with will be ours. People will come and park at our own private docks for our local use patrons. What if they go outside and use it, and go out there and park at ours and go and use theirs? The parking situation is still stretched thin. We see it daily. Our guests, our staff, and delivery partners struggle to find spots during peak times. This proposal would make that much worse. And there's no plan for designated handicap parking, which should be a non-negotiable in any responsible development. Fifth point, fairness. We're permanent business. We're here 12 months a year. We hire locally. We pay taxes, and we rely on the summer season to make up for slower months. This proposed seasonal vendors would show up for the busiest months, take advantage of the foot traffic, and disappear when the season ends with no year-round investment or accountability. That's not a level playing field. The proposal asks for 6 separate variances. That's excessive. If this many changes are needed, maybe this plan doesn't actually fit within what the space can support. It starts to feel like a variance request and more like a full rewrite of zoning rules for one party's benefit. 7th point, we weren't consulted. Neither were the other tenants we've spoken to. For a change this big that affects so many people, there should have been a transparent and inclusive discussion. Instead, this was done behind closed doors. 8th, and this is something we really want to stress. We're genuinely concerned that this setup could create a chaotic, unregulated atmosphere, a sort of pop-up second downtown, without the infrastructure, oversight, or planning to support it. And that kind of disorganized development always ends up hurting the people who were here first. Finally, to our knowledge, there is no precedent for the approving, no precedent for the approving a setup like the sorry, let me rephrase that again. Finally, to our knowledge, there is no precedent for approving setup like this under current zoning. Approving it now would open the door to similar requests in our other neighborhoods, further weakening the city's ability to enforce its own rules. So to be absolutely clear, we're asking that this variance request be denied in full. We're not against growth, but it needs to be planned, legal, inclusive, and fair to the businesses that have invested in this space year after year. Thank you for your time and for listening to our concerns.
Thank you very much. Our second deputation is Mr. Michael Kara.
Chair Stone, they are online, so I'll bring them into the meeting.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Just want to check to make sure that you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair, Mayor, and members of Council. My name is Michael Kara, and I'm here as legal counsel on behalf of Sam Peters Investments Limited. My client is the registered owner of 6 John Street, 96 Main Street East, and 104 Main Street East, all of which are located east of the subject property on the opposite side of John Street. As you may all recall, I appeared before you about a month and a half ago in response to a similar proposal that was presented by the applicant, and I'm attending today on behalf of my client to object the proposed application and to request that Planning Council not support the application in its current form. The application before you continues to require significant relief from the town's applicable zoning standards, both in terms of the number of variances and the order of magnitude. It is worth noting that 8 of the requested variances are virtually identical in nature to the relief that was sought the last time I was before you. Now, of those requested variances, 4 are related to expanding the activity width and reducing the minimum setbacks of the proposed new use. And the remaining 4 involve permissions for substandard parking space dimensions, aisle widths, and less than the required number of accessible parking spaces. And if you take a moment to look closely at each of the variances independently, the recurring theme is that the proponent is having difficulty fitting the various components of what is a very busy proposal onto a site that simply cannot accommodate the intensity of the proposed use. And in my respectful submission, as proposed, the application will have a significant and unacceptable adverse impact on neighboring properties, including my client's site. They point to a fundamental lack of fit between the proposed use and the physical constraints of the site. Even with a slight reduction to the number of food or beverage trucks from 7 to 5, the application would still result in permission for more than 2 times the number of food trucks that are permitted on the property, and the introduction of approximately 50 additional visitors at any given time on a site that is already experiencing significant constraints. Now, although one of the food trucks is now being proposed as a beverage truck, I would ask that you treat them as synonymous for the purpose of reviewing the proposal. To steal a line that Councillor Clark used during the April session, if it quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And that analogy holds true for the current set of revisions. Now, one noteworthy change is that staff have identified the possibility of Town Council granting a provisional approval of the application, subject to the applicant fulfilling a number of conditions, including the submission of a satisfactory traffic brief. Now, this may become a moot point because, to my surprise, the applicant has vehemently opposed every condition of approval. But on behalf of my client, if Council was inclined to issue a conditional approval, I'm respectfully requesting that this direction not be taken. At this stage, you do not have an up-to-date site plan drawing that shows this committee or any interested party what the applicant is proposing. Perhaps more surprisingly, no planning rationale has been submitted by the applicant in support of the revised proposal. And finally, the applicant continues to refuse to provide a traffic impact study, despite repeated requests from the town, the district, and members of the public. Now, I'd like to emphasize that the importance of the traffic brief extends beyond the question of parking supply. The traffic brief will address important questions, such as how the proposed landscape buffer will affect sightlines to and from drivers along John Streets. It will examine if and how vehicles will be able to complete the most basic of turning movements based on the revised aisle width that is being proposed by the applicant. The brief will also determine whether the existing parking supply is even sufficient for its current purposes, and you've heard deputations today that suggest that it already is an issue. Now, we submit that these are fundamental questions that should be addressed up front so that council can make an informed decision on whether the tests have been met, rather than granting an approval on a conditional basis in hopes that necessary criteria can and will be met down the road. The second reason we are requesting that council not grant a conditional approval is more closely tied to the changes that have been made to the Planning Act. As detailed in the letter that I filed with you, under the current legislative regime, the province has eliminated the right of third parties to file appeals with the Ontario Land Tribunal in an effort to stimulate the creation of new housing projects. Now, what this means in the current circumstances is that if a conditional approval were granted, there would be no opportunity for members of the public to review or comment on future reports or seek recourse if there are ongoing issues with those reports. In my submission, this highlights the importance of requiring proponents to answer important technical questions during the public process, as opposed to after provisional approval is granted. Now, since I won't have an opportunity necessarily to reply to the applicant's comments this afternoon. I would like to make one further point regarding the missing traffic brief. During the April meeting, the applicant's agent attempted to explain his client's rationale for not filing the traffic report that was requested by town and district staff. The two reasons that he provided at that time, which were doubled down on this afternoon, were one, this is a temporary use only, and two, that they're simply relying on existing parking that is to remain as is. In response, I would like to submit to you that whether a proposed use is temporary or permanent, the applicable tests under the Planning Act remain the same. And the fact that a use may only be in place for 3 years does not insulate an applicant from satisfying those tests, which are based on provincial statute. And secondly, the fact that it's an existing parking arrangement is not a compelling justification. This is a new use and a more intense form of development than what exists today. Parking supply that exists and may be manageable for the site today may not be when you introduce a series of 6 new buildings and seating that would accommodate upwards of 50 new patrons at any given time. In conclusion, I'd submit to you that the proposal presents serious and unresolved concerns related to traffic, parking, and public safety. The required variances are too significant, and in the absence of an up-to-date site plan, traffic brief, or even planning rationale, we're left with insufficient information to make an informed decision in my submission. And for these reasons, I respectfully submit to you that the application should be refused. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'm of course happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Council members, comments or questions? Councillor Cloutier.
I guess I'll get this ball rolling through you, sir. I got one question for Savitz, if we could. At a meeting this morning with operations, and the easement was brought up in there, and our operations department is quite adamant about the 6-meter easement. That's what's all over town. That's our laws, and so they're quite adamant, and I am with them too. I see on here it says realigned drainage. Why is it being realigned?
Through you, Mr. Chair, because through the lot development or lot grading plan that was prepared by the engineers, they felt that was the best alignment for it. So there is a underground pipe that goes from John Street under the parking lot and it spills out into that spillway. So they've just basically slightly shifted it and moved it around. There isn't an easement at all today. So the town has no rights to currently drain over their property. So their feelings are that they are being requested to provide one. And their feelings are that 3 is sufficient and 3 is more manageable on the site, and they just refuse 6. So,
okay, all right, that's one of the questions I had.
Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair Stone. I have a question for Savitz and then a comment. But the question is, why is the applicant going to all this work, trouble, and expense for a 3-year time period only? I don't understand that. I'd like to know what the reasoning behind that is.
Savitz?
through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know if I can really answer that, to be honest with you. That's their proposal, their right to apply for it. I've been hired to look at it from the planning perspective, but I was not provided with a specific reason as why they would go through all this expense just for a 3-year period.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I would think that's a pretty important question as part of this application. But anyhow, just like the last time this application was here, this proposal has a lot of food trucks in a small area. I still have all the same concerns as the last time I was here. I'd like to know why the planning department is recommending approval when the current bylaw says 2 food trucks per property. I'm not buying into the temporary outdoor restaurant plan here, and I think that is maybe a loophole that's being used here to justify why our planning department is being asked to approve it. These are clearly food trucks, and they'll be operated as such. I won't be supporting the application, and even if all the conditions were fulfilled, I would not be supporting this application.
All right, I'll go to staff. Kelsey, do you want to address that question?
Yeah, thank you for the question and comment. Yeah, so would be two avenues for this proposal, going through the licensing appeals committee or going to this committee or council. So they decided to go through this avenue, and our restaurant definition does allow for outdoor restaurants, and so it's as it's used collectively. That's why we thought it was appropriate to use that term. Thanks.
Any other comments from council? Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I'm following up on Councillor Clark's comment. In fact, that was my question too. So you asked it, but I think it's worth dwelling on for a minute, because I'm assuming that if we were to approve conditional on all of those things, that sets it up for whatever that permanent use is. And it's already, we've granted a number of variances based on this temporary use. And so there's part of me that I think, well, it's a bit of a back door to get to something else. And that's what makes me feel a little uncomfortable about this. I wish the applicant was a bit more forthcoming as to the future use. And I agree with Councillor Clark. Why go to all of this trouble for a 3-year temporary use? So there's something about that I'm just not comfortable with. And I think that there are some valid arguments from the next door neighbor, from one of the deputants, that, you know, they're here all year round, and this is really an important member of our business community, and who have raised some serious concerns. So I'm not really comfortable with this one, I have to say.
Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair Stone. I feel the same way. I think there's a lot of red flags here, and I think we really need to pay attention to what's going on and what the future holds. As the mayor stated, we do have a long-time business in that area that's been operating for years and hiring lots of local people, and it's very busy in the summertime. We know what that road is like. We just finally got rid of the turn, or the no left-hand turn onto John Street through the last construction, and really, if we were to do a traffic impact study, I think you'd see that no left-hand turn come up there again. And I'm not really prepared for that. Too many red flags for me.
Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you to the applicant. My question is, one of the conditions on the application is to not remove the 1988 zoning that's on there now with the proposed building that's there. They don't want that removed. Why wouldn't they want that removed if they're going to do this temporary application? But they do want to. Sorry?
No, go ahead. I said that was my question.
Oh, that was your question. Yeah, I'm sorry. So they don't want it removed. To me, that's a red flag to say, well, maybe they don't want it removed because they have something coming up down in the future. And that's just a speculation, but why wouldn't they want it removed if they're going to do all this work to put food trucks there?
Savas?
Through you, Mr. The site plan approval that's on there, what it represents is the future permanent use of the lands. What's being proposed here today is a CPP permit that's specific to a temporary land use. So I imagine what that means is that they're not ready to move forward with the permanent land use of the lands, and they want to use the property as an income property until they figure out what they want to do in terms of following what the site plan approval permits on the property. And until that time, they want to use it for this purpose. So I think that's maybe the avenue that they were looking to go down, is allow something temporary because they're not ready to move forward with the permanent land use yet. And the reason why they don't want to remove the site plan agreement that's on title is that they would have to apply for another CPP permit again later to reinstitute what's already been approved on title. And what's on title, as far as I am concerned, is building permit ready. So they would lose a significant value to the property by doing so.
Kelsey?
Thank you. Yeah, what was in 1988 was the zoning approval. So that has a property detail sketch associated with it. But there's been, I think, 5 site plans or 4 site plans associated with the property. But the most recent iteration that I believe I showed on screen showed a shed over some of the parking areas. So it's not really it's not really matching what today's standards would be. And there's been amendments to it in between. So we thought it was appropriate to implement these conditions as well as they would have to look at the standards of today. So, yeah.
Well, so I don't think this should have come before us. Don't think that it should have come with provisional approval. We've been very clear in the past couple years that 2 trucks per property is appropriate, especially in that area where there's several properties that have food trucks. I certainly can't support this and don't think it's appropriate. And too many red flags, as we've already noted. So, council, is there anything else you would like to do, or shall I read the motion? All right. Oh, it is a very long one with all the conditions, and everyone's read it in the package, and it is exactly as it was published. So I won't read this motion, but I will ask the question. All in favor? All opposed? And that's defeated. All right. We're moving on to our next application, Joe Lee Point, and Kelsey's going to speak to that.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 128 Jolie Point Road. The property is within the waterfront designation in the official plan and within the waterfront residential 1 60-meter precinct with flood overlay. You can see it here. The applicant proposes to construct various additions to an existing 1-story single detached dwelling, including a 22 square meter dwelling addition, as you could see on this side, a 28 square meter dwelling addition, and an 18.3 meter deck addition. The variations are to reduce the front yard setbacks for the additions, and then reduce the setbacks to a cold water lake, which Lake of Bays is, and to permit development within the flood overlay, which is not considered minor. So I've just done a little bit of so you could see here, there's a red line that goes across, and that's the flood elevation, and I've just done a little dashed line there. So you can see that there's a portion of the existing dwelling and a portion of the addition that fall within that flood elevation. Just to illustrate my other points. So it's just this portion here that would be within the flood overlay. In the WR1 precinct, it permits single detached dwellings and associated permitted use, accessory and shoreline structures. A number of reliefs have been requested to accommodate this dwelling addition. This is primarily due to the location of the existing legal non-complying development and the natural features and constraints on the property. The additions proposed are intended to improve the functionality of the legal non-conforming dwelling. The dwelling was developed in 1964. The existing dwelling was constructed with the approvals and standards of the time. The dwelling encroaches into the current front yard setback and the setback to the cold water lake, in addition to a small portion of the dwelling being built below the flood elevation. The additions are appropriately small in nature and maintaining the building line and being set back as much as possible while maintaining the utility of the dwelling. The proposal is lot coverage compliant, and the height of the addition will reflect the existing height. As such, the scale and massing of the development will be maintained. The property is small and well vegetated with only existing vegetation cleared and within the development envelope. Existing development will be in the cleared portion near the lake, and the proposal is informed by the current configuration of the site and dwelling. The additions are in a flat area requiring minimal site alteration and vegetation removal. Potential adverse off-site and adverse impacts were identified. A fish habitat assessment was completed by Riverstone to address impacts of the proposed development in relation to fish habitat, water quality, and natural heritage features. The fish habitat assessment outlined mitigation measures to offset the impacts related to the proposed development that will be implemented appropriately and can allow the ongoing maintenance of water quality and fish habitat. These recommendations are included as conditions to ensure the implementation of the application should it be approved. A portion of the property is within the flood zone overlay, as I illustrated, and only some of the dwelling is within the floodplain. Only minor additions of 10% are permitted from the existing footprint to minimize adverse impacts in the flood within flood hazard. Although the overall increase to the footprint is more than 10%, the increase within the floodplain remains at 9.6% of the existing footprint. All doors, windows, and other openings of the additions are also above the flood elevation. So of the 22 square meter dwelling addition that's within the flood overlay, 12.8 meters will be within the flood overlay, and it will have 2 access points, one above that elevation. As the addition is considered minor, the flood risk would be minimized. District staff did recommend denial of the applications. Their comments are outline the Muskoka official plan provisions and the provincial planning statement provisions, and that they do not comply. The notes they note the intent of these policies is to minimize further risk to human health and infrastructure associated with flooding risks. Staff consider this application to exceed the threshold for minor. Although as mentioned, the overall addition is more than 10% of the existing footprint. The addition is with less than 10% and would be considered minor through town staff. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Lake of Bays Association. One letter of support was provided to council prior to this meeting, and through staff's review and analysis, the application would appear to conform with the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial planning statement, and therefore staff are recommending provisional approval. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or the representative to make any comments. Welcome. Microphone.
That one. Good afternoon, Chair Stone, Mayor, and members of council. My name is Ian Bruce, and my wife Kathy and I are the owners of 128 Jolie Point Road. Thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes to you speaking about our application. The property's been in my family for over 60 years, and my wife and I became the owners of it in 2019. Before I get into our application, I just wanted to make a shout out to Kelsey, Trish, and the planning department staff we've been dealing with. This is our first time. We're new to this this process, and they've been super helpful and accessible to us, so we appreciate that. I think, as Kelsey has mentioned, our current cottage is a fairly modest 134 square meter dwelling. Other than, and you also mentioned, other than what we needed what was needed for the development itself, we've left the property entirely in its natural state. We haven't put in a lawn or a man-made beach or anything like that. We're proposing 3 small additions that'll increase the enjoyment of the property for our growing family. These are intended for our use. We don't rent out our cottage. First, we're proposing to add a 22-meter addition to the north end of the cottage. This will facilitate enhancing a 2-piece bathroom to be a 3-piece bathroom, rearranging or reconfiguring an existing bedroom and some closets, and adding some storage space. In order to accommodate that, we'll be removing an existing shed and an outhouse. And at present, we have 1 3-piece bathroom and 1 2-piece bathroom. So having a shower in the second bathroom is very much needed. Even after that enhancement, will be well below, from a plumbing fixture count perspective, will be well below the capacity of our septic system. At present, we only have 1 sitting area in our dwelling, so we're looking at adding on a 28 square meter addition to the south side of our cottage. It's intended to be sort of a media / sitting room where we would watch movies, play games, etc. This area would not contain a bedroom or any plumbing to it at all. And we propose to connect the media room to our existing deck by I think it was a 16 square meter deck, not 18, but what I would call a small deck. Regarding the media room itself, as Kelsey mentioned, it is larger than 10% of our existing cottage, but in part that's because our cottage is not that large. And given that we have a more modest sized cottage, we have sort of enhanced desire and need for some additional space. Based on the meeting we had with Kelsey, we did also adjust the location of the media room. We pushed it back from the lake to meet the setback requirements, and that also made it be less in the flood zone. So as Kelsey correctly pointed out, the area that will be in the flood zone is only 9.6% of our existing dwelling size. And I'd also like to confirm what Kelsey said is we're not going to have a basement in there, and all the window and door openings will be above the flood elevation. By having these additions in the locations that we've proposed them, we will maintain the current building line. We pushed back our additions as much as possible, while also maintaining sort of the utility and flow of the dwelling. Finally, we do have letters of support from each of our two next door neighbors. Pat Peld at lot number 142 said, "You have the support of both David and myself in regard to your project, and I know you'll be enhancing our small corner of the lake." And on the other side, from Rob Spence of property 118, he said, "Thank you for sharing your plans with us. It sounds lovely." So thank you for your consideration of our application, and I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you. Council questions, comments? Nothing. That's a good thing. This is rather lengthy as well, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. It provisionally approves it. It's just like in your package, so the question is all in favor. And that carries.
Thank you very much.
Well, boss says I have to read this. For consent file B09-2025 HTE, as provided in the report, an objection was received to this application, changing the approval from the Director of Development Services to Planning Council. All right. Kelsey, are you speaking to Clark's Lane?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the property is located at 194 Clark's Lane. The property is within the community residential designation in the official plan. And the property is within the community residential precinct and has site-specific exception and open space, conservation, and natural constraints 1 and 2 overlay. The purpose and effect of the consent application is to create one new community residential lot with an area of approximately 2 hectares and 30 meters of frontage on Old Muskoka Road. The retained lot would have an area of 26 hectares with 41 meters of frontage on Clark's Lane. There is a current application at the district for a subdivision and condominium for phase 2 of the Clark's Lane subdivision, which was heard at the last meeting. And then the first phase was approved and has been finalized. So there was the site-specific exceptions that were in place from that process and through going through to the OLT. So this is a portion of the property that's kind of off to the side that's split by the conservation zoning. So the CR precinct, the community residential precinct, requires 1.4 hectares in area and 30 meters of frontage, which has been provided. And this is echoed in the designation as well. So the lot is greater and it would permit a single detached dwelling. There was also the closure of the road allowance, which you could see here, which does now allow access to the lot. The official plan also speaks to environmental protection and directing development away from natural features and hazard lands that are unsuitable for development. There were steep slopes, wildland fire hazard identified on the property, as well as wetlands and watercourses. The EIS that was prepared for the subdivision applications, subdivision and condominium applications, previously delineated those features as well as buffered them. So none of those features are shown on this property, so there were no concerns with respect to the natural heritage system. 3 letters of objection were received. Within the 2 letters from the same commenter, they detailed concerns about the civic address that was related to the subdivision and to these lands and access. And there was also a comment regarding the future development of the site and concerns about vegetation removal and such. As there is a holding provision on this property, it would be required to go through a CPP. And so through staff's review and analysis, the application would appear to conform with intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial planning statement, and therefore staff are recommending provisional approval. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. We do have a deputation for this, but I'm going to go to the applicant first. Applicant or their representative.
Savas Ferris, Plan Muskoka. I don't have much to add. I think Kelsey's described the proposal accurately. It's a fairly straightforward proposal. The lot complies in area and frontage to the requirements of the CPP bylaw and meets the intent of the official plan. As mentioned, it's part of the subdivision lands, phase 2 of the Hampton Woods subdivision. The EIS that's being prepared, well documented the sort of stream that's in the back of the property, which is what that property line more or less follows. There's an ample building envelope far from that stream. That would be no reason for anybody to be back there anyways. The zoning is in place to protect it regardless, so there really is no risk there. In terms of from the one objection letter that I read, it seems to be a lot of the objections relate to the Clark's Lane access. That does not really relate to this application because it seeks to get access from Old Muskoka Road, and that's where the road allowance closure occurred that allowed that to happen. So I don't see that as directly related. It seems to be a little bit more related to the subdivision proposal that's currently underway with the District of Muskoka. So that's all I really have to add. I'd be happy to answer your question you have. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. So our deputation is Inslee and Stewart.
But this is going to be technical. So bear with me, please. So on this consent application, the legal description of the whole residential rural lot is described as Part Lot 14, Concession 7, and Part Lot 15, Concession 7. Other descriptors are not familiar to us, i.e. Plan 35, 15746 plus parts, Plan 35R 23983 plus parts, the reference to 2 hectares with 30 meters frontage on Old Muskoka Road and 41 meters frontage along Clark's Lane for the 2 separate lots. Right now it's whole. The latter does not exist. I want to emphasize that. The latter does not exist. There are 2 separate Clark's Lane phasing blocks. Phasing blocks. I'm hoping you all know what that means. Totaling 41 meters. So the applicant has combined 2 separate, each separately located, and are 20 meters, not sufficient for lot frontage in the subdivision. So carrying on, according to the OP, the adopted OP, you require 30 meters frontage on a road. These block details, location and purpose, are listed elsewhere in this information. There is no lot frontage on Plan 35M-570, which is Clark's Lane subdivision. Misleading information on this application states a number 194 to exist as an address on Clark's Lane, also listed in the tax roll. The last number on the original subdivision, note this, the last number on the original subdivision, Lot 23, is 182. Number 182, at the end of Clark's Lane. There is nothing else. There is a phased 1-foot allowance reserve referred to as Block 24, which is 0.305 meters equaling 1 foot, that was purposed for public road standard development between Lot 22 and 23 in the cul-de-sac from the original subdivision to the proposed Phase 3, which that would be off that cul-de-sac.
So if I could just, you're talking about something that isn't what we're voting on today.
You're voting on a separation, a separate of two properties. It's now currently one. We're objecting to that because it now, as a whole property, has border on Old Muskoka Road. So that is one property so we are objecting to that severance, consent to severance, because automatically that gives a certificate to the Clark's Lane so-called address that we're trying to establish that there is no address there. So that would basically orphan that piece of property that is there, would be to the north of the current one that was just presented today.
Fine.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
It's okay, it's okay. All right, I know it's technical. Okay, so let me just gather my stuff here. So the reference, okay, I've got that. There is a referenced 1-foot allowance reserve referred to as Block 24 off the cul-de-sac. That's 0.305 meters, which is the 1 foot. That was proposed for a public road standard development between lots 22, 23 cul-de-sac from the original subdivision, which is Clark's Lane right at this point. That was Phase 1. To the proposed Phase 3. That would be Phase 3 of the original plan for subdivision if it went through. Number 2 was the west side, okay? So number 3, as per width indicates on the survey, 20.117 meters, or public road width, which would be 66 feet, which was what it was supposed to do as a phase block to bring it up to public road standard. It was to follow the same characteristics of Plan 35M 570 subdivision registered at the District of Muskoka on September 24th, 1981. The layout and plus the layout to provincial standards. Lot size and numbers were to be consistent with Phase 1. That's the current Clark subdivision. There are other blocks for the same purpose. Phased Block 25 with 30.25 meters width was not used between Lot 18 and 20 for the new first private condominium subdivision. This developer used subdivision Lot 20 for a non-compliant commercial road over a permanent stream. The third phased Block 26, the one that I'm speaking about now, with the 20.364 meters is 66 plus feet, and that is located at 112 Clark's Lane. In our opinion, the application misleads by adding phased Block 24 and phased Block 26 to total 41 meters, as if it's a lot with frontage on Clark's Lane. These are unopened road allowances for public road standards with a 1-foot reserve. How and why is that these phasing blocks have been transferred to an individual's ownership versus the local municipality from 2009 when the Subdivision 7 Holdings Corporation dissolved. This is a standard for registered subdivision protection. There are two choices for a municipality when dealing with a 1-foot reserve phased block ownership. Number one is to own these temporarily, or number two, to own it permanently when the subdivision company dissolves. Why wasn't the temporary option selected to close the phased blocks and give it to the abutting properties equaling municipality due diligence to protect the subdivision? That's the question. In closing, this consent application should be rejected due to the serious misleading information and on liability for access and a non-existent lot address. As it sits now, the rural residential lot has an Old Muskoka Road address. This is a feeder road of which all land development models, such as this one, currently use. If you look at other models that are in other places, like South Mary Lake Road is another example. Applications for land development should be directed through that legal address, which is on Old Muskoka Road. People who've planned and built this original subdivision did their due diligence, creating beautiful lots, protection of the environment with peace and quiet. All reasons to purchase within a subdivision for its value, privacy, and protection for its orderly, consistent use. Any additions were to create the same footprints without affecting the original Phase 1. What we do have is degradation, and unless this is reevaluated to contribute to the land development, it negates all the success here for our community. Thank you for your serious deliberation on this consent application. This decision affecting Stevenson Ward makes the difference in protecting all Muskoka communities and well beyond that. If you have any questions about this, we'll try and answer.
Wonderful.
David is more.
Thank you.
More. Thank you.
Council members, comments or questions? Don't see a lot of hands going up. All right. I'm going to move on. Moved by Councillor Cloutier, seconded by Councillor Schumacher. It was resolved that Planning Council provisionally approved consent application B09-2025 HTE for the creation of one new community residential lot, conditional on a registrable description of the severed lot being submitted to the clerk, including all rights of ways and easements, along with a registered copy of the reference plan, the owner's taxes being in good standing, site inspection fee of $272 being paid to the town of Huntsville, a consent finalization fee in the amount of $250 being paid to the town of Huntsville, and 5% cash in lieu of parkland being paid to the town of Huntsville on the severed lands. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that carries.
So I guess this will go to district now. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Renwick, second by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that confirmation bylaw 2025-62 be received and passed this 11th day of June 2025. All in favor? And that carries. Moved by Deputy Mayor Armour, seconded by Councillor Clark. Be it resolved that we do now hereby adjourn at 3:37 p.m. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you, everyone.